Second, Velkesh continued, they demonstrate unprecedented persistence. Other species retreat when facing impossible odds. Humans adapt their tactics and continue fighting. They treat military defeat not as an endpoint, but as a problem requiring a creative solution. More footage appeared, showing human forces continuing to fight long after any rational species would have surrendered. Medics treating wounded soldiers under fire, engineers repairing weapons while battles raged around them, commanders finding new ways to attack even when their original plans had failed completely. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Velkesh said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, humans appear to view their own lives and equipment as expendable resources in service of mission objectives. This is not recklessness or ignorance. It is a calculated decision that victory is more important than survival. The chamber fell completely silent as the implication sank in. Every species represented in the council had evolved survival instincts that prioritized preservation of life and resources. Humans seemed to have evolved something different entirely. Council leader Zarthik, an ancient being whose species had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, finally spoke. The question before us is simple. How do we classify a species that treats warfare not as a competition to be won with minimal losses, but as a puzzle to be solved regardless of cost? The holographic display shifted to show the proposed classification, Classer persistence. Predator. It was a category that had never been used before in galactic history. All in favor of classifying humanity as a Classer persistence predator species. Zarthik called. The vote was swift and unanimous. Platform after platform lit up with agreement. Even species that had never agreed on anything before found themselves united in this assessment. Let it be recorded in the official galactic archives. Zarthik declared that future military conflicts with humanity should be avoided through diplomatic means whenever possible. Direct military engagement with a species that treats warfare as an engineering problem rather than a tactical exercise is inadvisable for any rational civilization in the observer's gallery. The human delegation watched as their species received what amounted to a galactic warning label. Ambassador Lee sat quietly, processing the fact that humanity had just been officially declared too dangerous to fight. Captain Park, recently promoted to Admiral after her actions at Proxima Relay, leaned over to whisper to Ambassador Lee, "Do you think they'll ever understand that we're not trying to be scary? We're just trying to protect what matters to us." Lee glanced round at the alien representatives, many of whom were still staring at the human delegation with mixtures of fascination and concern. "Probably not," he replied with a small smile. "But maybe that misunderstanding will keep the peace better than any treaty we could negotiate," as the council session officially ended. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humans didn't fight to win battles. They fought to solve problems, and a species that treated every conflict as a problem requiring a solution, regardless of the cost, was perhaps the most dangerous kind of warrior the galaxy had ever encountered. The Endry Triclord can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. 37 vessels, sir. Mostly destroyers and frigates. Our heaviest ship is the cruiser Determination, and she's only half the size of their smallest dreadnought. The math was simple and terrifying. 10 alien ships for every human vessel. Advanced energy weapons against human projectile systems. Shields that could deflect meteors against armor that was barely adequate for space debris. Any tactical computer in the galaxy would calculate human chances of victory at less than 1%. Admiral Park opened a communication channel to all ships in the human fleet. "This is Admiral Park to all vessels. I'm not going to lie to you about our situation. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and facing technology that's centuries ahead of us on the bridge of the destroyer defense." Captain Sung listened to his admiral's words while watching the alien fleet range itself for attack. The enemy formation was perfect. a textbook example of overwhelming force applied with mathematical precision. But I want you to remember something, Admiral Park continued. Every one of those alien ships represents a species that thinks they know how humans fight. They expect us to line up like good little soldiers and trade shots until we're all dead. They expect us to follow their rules. Admiral Park paused, looking round his bridge at the young officers who had volunteered to defend humanity's future. All ships, prepare for ramming speed. The silence that followed was profound. On every human vessel, crew members looked at each other with a mixture of shock and understanding. Captain Sung was the first to respond. Defiance acknowledges, Admiral. Ramming speed. One by one, the other human ships confirmed the order. The alien fleet commanders, monitoring human communications, initially dismissed the transmissions as some kind of technical error. No rational species would deliberately crash their ships into enemy vessels. The first hint that something was wrong came when the human fleet suddenly accelerated. Instead of forming defensive positions or attempting to retreat, the human ships aimed directly at the center of the alien formation and engaged their maximum thrust. Commander Velkar of the Eltarian flagship watched in disbelief as the human vessels approached at suicidal speed. "They must be trying to ram us," she announced. To her bridge crew, "Activate point defense systems. Destroy them before they can reach us." But the humans had already thought of that, as the alien weapons opened fire. The human ships began evasive maneuvers that made no sense from a conventional tactical standpoint. Instead of trying to preserve their hulls for prolonged combat, they used their ships like guided missiles, accepting damage that would normally force retreat. Captain Sung's destroyer Defiance took direct hits from 3 different energy weapons. As it charged toward the Altaria and flagship, her hull glowed red-hot from plasma impacts. Her forward sections were torn away by particle beams, and her life support systems were failing. Any other species would have changed course or surrendered. Instead, Sung ordered his crew to the escape pods while maintaining his ship's collision course. "All hands, abandon ship. Repeat, all hands to the pods. We're going to give them something to remember us by." The Defiance struck the Altarian flagship just as the last escape pod cleared the destruction zone. The impact tore through the alien vessel's shields like they were made of paper. The kinetic energy of the collision devastating systems designed to withstand energy weapons, but never tested against pure physical force. Commander No's cruiser Determination chose an even more spectacular approach. Her ship punched through 3 enemy vessels in sequence, using its momentum to cause maximum damage before finally breaking apart. The sight of a human cruiser literally tearing through their formation sent shock waves through the alien fleet, but perhaps the most terrifying moment came when Lieutenant Shin Fighter Squadron received the ramming order. The small craft had no chance of significantly damaging capital ships through conventional attack, but as guided missiles they became devastatingly effective. The massive Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their floating platforms, each one processing the incredible evidence they had witnessed over the past 3 days. The air itself seemed heavy with the weight of what they had learned about humanity. Ambassador Velkesh of the Pacifist Coalition rose from his platform, his translucent form shimmering as he prepared to deliver the final assessment. The pacifists were known throughout the galaxy for their careful analysis and logical thinking. If any species could make sense of human behavior, it would be them, honored council members. Velkesh began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced sound system. "We have spent countless hours analyzing every recorded human military engagement from the past year. We have studied their tactics, examined their equipment, and interviewed survivors from both sides of these conflicts." The holographic displays round the chamber activated, showing detailed statistics and battle reports. Numbers that should have been impossible began filling the air around the assembled representatives. The evidence before us defies conventional military theory. Velkesh continued in the Battle of Kepler Station. Humans achieved a 93% survival rate in situations where our best tactical computers predicted total annihilation. At the Vorthen Fortress assault, they completed their mission using improvised weapons against technology centuries more advanced than their own. Admiral Krexel, who had presented the original evidence, found himself nodding along with the assessment. Even after days of studying the data, the human military performance seemed impossible. But perhaps most disturbing, Velkesh said, his form flickering with what might have been concern, is their response to the concept of acceptable losses. Every known species in the galaxy operates under the principle that some objectives are not worth the cost required to achieve them. The holographic display showed footage from the Proxima Relay battle, human ships ramming into enemy vessels while their crews evacuated at the last second, fighters being used as guided missiles. Entire fleets treating their own spacecraft as expendable weapons. Humans appear to reject this fundamental principle entirely. Velkesh announced, they do not calculate acceptable losses. They calculate victory conditions and pursue them regardless of cost. Council member Thynek, who had observed the human rescue mission on Zephyr Prime, activated his communication ray. If I may add, to this assessment, the insectoid being said, I personally witnessed human soldiers walking across an entire continent to complete their mission. They carried wounded comrades who should have been left behind. They shared rations with injured teammates while going hungry themselves. This behavior continued for 6 days without any guarantee of success. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the chamber. The assembled representatives began to understand that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history. Velkesh nodded acknowledgement to Thynek before continuing. Our analysis reveals 3 key factors that make humans uniquely dangerous in military conflicts. First, they weaponize their environment. Where other species see obstacles, humans see opportunities. Broken vehicles become battering rams. Ceremonial fountains become defensive positions. Their own damaged spacecraft become kinetic weapons. The holographic displays showed examples from each major engagement. Human ingenuity turning everything round them into tools of war. Not literally, of course, but they scattered so quickly and unpredictably that the Kethra's carefully aimed volleys struck empty air. Sergeant Beck dove behind a damaged hover transport that had been left near the landing pad for repairs. Instead of using it as simple cover, he somehow managed to get the partially functional vehicle started and aimed it directly at the approaching Kethra formation, the site of a smoking, sparking transport vehicle careening toward their perfect battle line shocked the Kethra warriors. They had never encountered an enemy that used broken equipment as weapons. Their formation wavered as soldiers dove out of the way, their discipline advanced dissolving into chaos. Private Song found herself pinned down near an ornate fountain that decorated the ceremonial plaza. Rather than accepting defeat, she began dismantling the fountain's decorative elements, using the heavy stone pieces as improvised projectiles. Her accurate throws disrupted the Kethra soldiers' aim and forced them to take cover behind their own ceremonial structures. But the most shocking moment came when Lieutenant Jung somehow managed to reach a damaged Kethra plasma cannon that had been knocked over during the initial confusion, while plasma bolts scorched the ground around him. He studied the alien weapon's controls for precious seconds. Then, impossibly, he got it working and turned it against its former operators. The Kethra warriors watched in disbelief as their own technology was used against them by someone who had never seen suck. Each equipment before the psychological impact was devastating. These humans were not just surviving against impossible odds. They were adapting and improvising with whatever they could find. Within 2 hours, General Hantho received reports that made no sense. His superior force was retreating from 8 humans who had somehow turned the entire diplomatic plaza into a weapon against them. Captain Ryu checked his tactical display one final time as Strike Team 7 stealth transport approached the crystalline canyons of Zephyr Prime. The planet's surface gleamed like a massive jewel beneath them, its natural crystal formations creating a maze of razor-sharp peaks and valleys that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Remember, we have a narrow window, Ryu announced to his 12-person team. The Zephyrian transport carrying our scientists leaves for their core worlds in 72 hours. Once they reach the inner systems, we'll never see them again. The captured scientists were humanity's top researchers, taken during a peaceful exploration mission that had gone horribly wrong. The Zephyrians had claimed they were spies, despite clear evidence that they were simply studying the unique crystal formations that made Zephyr Prime famous throughout the galaxy. Sergeant Kim ran final equipment checks on their infiltration gear. Transports ready for a silent approach. Captain, we should be able to land within 50 kilometers of the detention facility. Everything went perfectly until it didn't. As their stealth transport descended through Zephyr Prime's atmosphere, a massive solar flare from the system's twin stars created an electromagnetic pulse that fried their navigation systems. The ship's pilot, Corporal Lee, fought desperately to maintain control as warning alarms filled the cabin. "We're going down," Lee shouted over the screaming engines. "Everyone brace for impact." The transport slammed into the crystalline ground with tremendous force, its hull scraping across the sharp crystal formations for nearly a kilometer before finally coming to rest in a deep canyon. When the dust settled, half the team was injured, their equipment was scattered across the crash site, and their communication ray was completely destroyed. Observer Thionik watched the crash from his monitoring station aboard the Zephyrian surveillance vessel orbiting high above the planet. The tall, insectoid being adjusted his sensory equipment to get a better view of the crash site, expecting to witness the final moments of the human rescue attempt. "The humans have suffered catastrophic mission failure," Thionik reported to his superiors through the ship's communication system. "Their transport is destroyed. Multiple team members appear injured, and they have no means of calling for extraction. Standard protocol would be to activate emergency beacons and wait for a rescue." But as Thionik continued his observations, the humans did something unexpected. Instead of setting up a distress signal or establishing a defensive perimeter around the crash site, Captain Ryu began organizing his team for movement. "We can't stay here," Ryu announced, surveying his injured soldiers. "The Zephyrians will have detected our crash. We need to move before they send investigation teams." Private Min was clearly in agony, her leg bent at an unnatural angle from the impact. Any other species would have left her behind with medical supplies and a promise to send help. Instead, Merrick Kang quickly fashioned a crude splint from pieces of the wrecked transport and helped Min to her feet. "I can walk," Min insisted through gritted teeth, though every step sent waves of pain through her body. "Just give me something to lean on." Thionik watched in fascination as the humans gathered their scattered equipment and began walking deeper into the Crystal Canyon system. They had no vehicles, no communication equipment, and several wounded team members. The logical course of action would be to find shelter and wait for rescue. Instead, they started walking toward their original target, still hundreds of kilometers away. "This behavior makes no sense," Thionik muttered to himself, adjusting his long-range sensors to track the human team's progress. "They cannot possibly reach the detention facility on foot. The journey will take them through some of the most dangerous terrain on the planet. But the humans kept walking for 6 days. Thynek monitored their incredible journey across Zephyr, Prime's hostile surface. The crystal formations cut their uniforms and sliced their exposed skin. The thin atmosphere made every breath a struggle. The temperature dropped below freezing at night and rose to dangerous levels during the day. Private Min walked for 3 full days on her broken leg before Medic Kang could fashion a better support bra. From salvaged materials, she never complained, never asked to rest, never suggested that the team should leave her behind. When the pain became too much, she simply bit down on a piece of leather and kept moving. Medic Kang herself became a source of amazement for Thynek. The human medic consistently gave her food rations to the more severely injured team members, insisting that she could manage on less. By the 4th day, she was clearly weak from hunger, yet she continued to tend to her comrades' wounds and maintain their improvised medical equipment. They should have died on day 2. Thynek reported to his superiors, his voice filled with something approaching, or the combination of injuries, exposure, and lack of proper supplies should have stopped them. Instead, they're still moving, still carrying their wounded, still advancing toward the target. The Zephyrian Command Council listened to Thynek's reports with growing disbelief. No species in their experience had ever attempted such a journey under these conditions. The humans were demonstrating a level of persistence that challenged everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about biological limitations. On the 6th day, the impossible happened. The humans reached the detention facility. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the human flagship Resilience, watching the tactical display with grim determination. The Proxima Relay was humanity's most important strategic position, a massive space station that controlled hyperspace routes between 12 different star systems. If it fell, human colonies would be cut off from each other, isolated and vulnerable to individual conquest. The combined alien armada stretched across space like a deadly constellation. 300 warships from 6 different species had united, for one purpose: to crush humanity before it could spread further into the galaxy. Their vessels gleamed with advanced technology that humanity could barely comprehend. Energy weapons that could slice through planets and defensive shields that had never been breached. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender demands from the alien fleet," reported Communications Officer Jung, her voice steady despite the impossible situation. "They're offering to spare civilian populations if we abandon the relay immediately." Admiral Park studied the enemy formation through his command display. The Altarian dreadnoughts formed the center of their attack formation, massive ships bristling with particle beam cannons. Zephyrian cruisers flanked them with their crystal-based energy weapons. Kethva battleships brought up the rear with their plasma artillery rays. Each enemy vessel was larger and more powerful than anything in the human fleet. "How many ships do we have?" Park asked his tactical officer. Admiral Crixeville stood at the center of the vast circular chamber, his 6 arms trembling slightly as he activated the holographic projectors. The Galactic Council had not convened an emergency session like this in over 300 cycles. Representatives from 47 different species filled the floating platforms that surrounded the central speaking area, their various forms of communication creating a low hum of nervous energy. "Fellow council members," Crixeville began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the common galactic tongue. "What you are about to witness will challenge everything we thought we knew about warfare." The first hologram materialized above them, showing the smoking ruins of Fortress Nexa on Vorthan Prime. The massive structure had been considered impregnable for over 2 centuries, its energy shields and automated defense systems having repelled countless attacks from various species throughout the galaxy. "This footage was recorded 3 days ago," Crixeville announced. The hologram shifted to show a small group of human soldiers approaching the fortress. They moved in a formation that looked almost chaotic to the trained military minds watching. Yet there was something unsettling about their coordination. Commander Lee raised his hand, and the humans scattered in 12 different directions. The Vorthan defenders, expecting a traditional frontal assault, found themselves confused as the humans seemed to vanish into the rocky terrain surrounding the fortress. "Watch carefully," Crixivil said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The humans had no heavy weapons, no siege equipment, and were outnumbered 3-1. The hologram showed what happened next. The humans began using the environment itself as a weapon. They triggered controlled rock slides that blocked the fortress's main artillery positions. They used magnetic charges to turn the Vorthan zone, defensive mines against their shield generators. One human soldier actually climbed the fortress walls using nothing but magnetic boots and determination. Carrying explosives that had been fashioned from medical supplies and power cells, Council member Veltar of the Nexus Collective, her crystalline form glowing brighter with agitation, leaned forward on her platform. "This is impossible. No species attacks a fortified position without proper siege equipment." "Keep watching," Crixivil replied grimly. The hologram showed Commander Lee and his team fighting their way through the fortress corridors. When their ammunition ran low, they began using Vorthan weapons taken from fallen defenders. When those failed, they improvised clubs from debris. When injured, they continued fighting. When cornered, they used their own bodies as shields to protect their teammates. The battle lasted 18 hours. Crixivil continued. At no point did the humans request reinforcements or attempt to withdraw. Captain Kim's squad held the eastern corridor for 6 hours straight without rest, food, or medical attention. They were shot, burned, and beaten, yet they never stopped fighting. The Zephyrian representative, Murdoch, his tentacles writhing with discomfort, activated his own holographic display. "If I may add to this disturbing evidence," he said, his voice translated into a series of harmonic tones. "Our scouts recorded this during the Kepler station incident." A new hologram appeared, showing a human medic named Park crawling across an open battlefield while plasma bolts scorched the ground round her. She was dragging a wounded soldier to safety, her own uniform torn and bloody from shrapnel wounds. "Observe the tactical situation," Murdoch explained. "The logical response would be to abandon the wounded soldier and retreat to safety." The human medic had no protective equipment, no weapons, and no support. Any rational being would have preserved themselves for future battles. The hologram showed Park reaching a wounded comrade, then immediately beginning medical treatment while enemy fire continued round them. She used her own body to shield the wounded soldier. Working with tools that had been damaged in the fighting, she spent 47 minutes treating him in the open. Murdoch continued, his voice filled with something approaching awe. When rescue arrived, she had saved his life at the cost of her own severe injuries. She could have died for someone who was already statistically lost. A murmur ran through the assembled council members. The Altarian delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical suit, flickered with concern. "This behavior pattern is consistent across all our encounters with human military forces. They seem to operate on principles that defy basic survival instincts." Crixivil nodded solemnly and activated another display. This one showed space battle footage from the Outer Rim conflicts. Human spacecraft, clearly outgunned and outnumbered, continued fighting even when their hulls were breached and their weapon systems failing. Captain Sung's destroyer fought for 3 hours after its main reactor was damaged, Crixivil explained. They had no shields, no weapons, and minimal life support. Any other species would have surrendered or abandoned ship. Instead, they used their damaged vessel as a battering ram. taking out 2 enemy cruisers before finally being destroyed. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. These humans didn't just fight to win battles. They fought as if the concept of acceptable losses simply didn't exist in their thinking. As the evidence mounted, the council members began to understand that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that treated warfare not as a calculation of resources and risks, but as a puzzle to be solved regardless of cost, 6 months before the Galactic Council's emergency meeting. Ambassador Cho adjusted his formal diplomatic robes as the human transport vessel approached the Ketha border worlds. The sleek diplomatic ship glided through space, its white hull marked with the symbols of peaceful contact. This was supposed to be humanity's first major trade negotiation with the Ketha hegemony, a powerful military empire that controlled 17 star systems. Remember, everyone. Ambassador Cho addressed his small security team. "We're here to build bridges, not burn them. The Ketha have been isolated for centuries. They're probably just as nervous about this meeting as we are." Captain Yu nodded from his position near the airlock. His security detail consisted of only 8 soldiers, lightly armed with basic projectile weapons, and wearing standard diplomatic protection gear. They had deliberately chosen minimal armament to avoid appearing threatening to their hosts. High above the planet's surface, General Hanther observed the approaching human vessel from the bridge of his massive dreadnought. The Ketha commander stood nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms crossed over his armored chest as he studied the readings on his tactical display. Such a small ship. Hanther mused to his aide. Are the humans truly so confident, or are they simply foolish? The Ketha were a proud warrior race, their entire society built round military strength and honor in battle. They had conquered their neighboring systems through superior technology and disciplined tactics. Their plasma weapons could cut through most known armor, and their energy shields had never been penetrated by conventional weapons. As the human shuttle descended toward the planetary capital, everything seemed to be going according to plan. The landing pad was surrounded by ceremonial guards, their weapons powered down as a sign of peaceful intent. Ambassador Cho stepped out of the shuttle with a warm smile. Carrying the traditional gifts that human diplomats offered to new allies, the trouble began with a simple misunderstanding. When the Ketha Honor Guard performed their traditional weapon display, raising their plasma rifles in salute, the human security team instinctively reached for their sidearms. It was a reflex action born from centuries of human military training that taught soldiers to be ready for any situation. General Hanther, watching through his surveillance systems, saw only what appeared to be humans drawing weapons during a peaceful ceremony. His military mind, trained to respond to threats with overwhelming force, made a fateful decision. All units, engage the humans immediately. Hanther barked into his communicator. They have shown hostile intent during diplomatic proceedings. Show them the price of disrespecting the Ketha hegemony. The first wave of Ketha warriors emerged from concealed positions around the landing pad. 50 elite soldiers in gleaming energy armor, their plasma rifles crackling with deadly power. They moved in perfect formation, just as they had been trained for hundreds of battles. Their energy shields shimmered round them like translucent walls, and their synchronized steps created a rhythmic thunder across the ground. Captain Yoon had perhaps 3 seconds to assess the situation before the shooting started. His 8 soldiers were spread out in standard diplomatic formation, designed for a ceremony rather than combat. They had projectile weapons that would barely scratch Ketha energy armor, and their basic protective gear was meant to stop small arms fire, not military-grade plasma bolts. Any conventional military force would have been annihilated in the first 30 seconds. The Ketha expected exactly that outcome as they opened fire with their advanced weapons. Plasma bolt sliding, up the air like deadly fireworks dot instead. Something impossible happened. The humans vanished.